Welcome to the Peep Show podcast.
Your glance at sex and social justice.
With Jesse and PJ Sage. Hello everyone, we are happy to be back with yet another episode. I'm particularly excited about this one because we are devoting it to mothers and motherhood. For this reason, I also have to admit that I'm a little nervous because society is particularly judgmental of mothers who do sex work, and we are going to talk about that on this episode. We are super excited to feature an interview with Ruby Rockafella, a burlesque dancer who continued to perform and model throughout her pregnancy, about what that experience was like for her, and then we're going to move on to a roundtable discussion between Alex Bishop, Penny Trait, and myself about the challenges of being a sex worker and a mother. But first, the news.
Before we jump into the news, we wanted to give you all a little update on the podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast has not been coming out as frequently as we have wanted it to, and part of that is that our life kind of got overturned a couple of months ago, and we are trying to balance that all back out again. When we started the podcast, I had a full-time office job, and we were doing a lot of our sex work and podcasting on the side. And I got laid off of my job a couple of months ago. And what happened when I got laid off is that we kind of went into a panic and was trying to figure out how to make money.
Truth. And we still are.
We're still trying to figure out how to make money and make up for the salary that I am no longer getting. And so that's meant that the things like the podcast that aren't super big money makers had to go on the back burner while we tried to get the phone sex business and the camming business and the clip production business off the ground.
But we've been hustling hard, and
we have been hustling hard.
We were nominated for XBiz
Best Clip Artist Duo.
Yes, XBiz Best Clip Artist Duo.
We are so excited, and we were so shocked. But
we get to go to Miami.
We do get to go to Miami.
We get to go to an award ceremony.
And we get to walk on the red carpet.
Which is going to be nuts, especially for two radio podcasty people.
For some kind of nerdy academic podcasters to be on a porn red carpet.
Absolutely.
But apparently that means that people like our stuff. I don't know. I don't even know what it means.
Well, it means that we're going to get to cover XBiz Miami for the podcast, and that's going to be awesome.
Oh, that is true. It does mean that. So we are excited about that.
Yep.
It also means we should buy some nice clothes.
Still working on that.
So anyways, all that to say, the podcast has still been totally important, but we've been a little busy trying to figure out how to make ends meet in this business. And on top of that, in the middle of us trying to do that, FOSTA and SESTA were passed, which threw a huge monkey wrench into that as well.
Yep, but we haven't been ignoring the podcast, and we've taken this time to really think about what it is we're doing, our strengths, things we can improve on, and how we're kind of presenting ourselves. We're going to do a little bit of rebranding.
Yeah, particularly since we started the podcast thinking that it was going to be more of a general podcast on sex. And we realized as we've been doing it that we've become so entrenched in the sex work community, and
which we love.
Which we do love. And in a lot of sex work activism, that as we were going over the first 13 episodes of the show, we realized that there's a pretty strong thread of sex work and social justice. And so we are going to move in that direction more explicitly.
But to tackle these issues, we believe that we still need to put them in a broader context. So we decided to go with the tagline, Sex and Social Justice.
Yeah, and we're really excited. We have a lot of ideas for where we're going to take this. And in the next 2 episodes, for example, this one that we're doing today, we're going to talk about issues of motherhood and sexuality. And then in the episode after that, we are going to be talking about kink and polyamory and consent.
Really important topics that we've been meaning to get around to focusing on more, and we're going to be excited to talk about those things too.
So in sum, we are happy to have had the experience of going to AVN. We are also glad to have a break to kind of revamp where we're going with the podcast, and we have a lot of great ideas, and we're really excited about them.
So yeah, thank you guys for listening, especially all of you who've been there from the beginning.
Yeah.
And
we really appreciate the support for this little operation that we have going on in our bedroom here.
And I suppose now's as good a time as any to say that we really could use your support, even if it's just like $1 a month. If you could hop on over to the Patreon. We really, really, really love this podcast, and we want to keep it going. And it's hard. We're both self-employed and freelancing right now.
Yeah.
And anything you could do would super help us. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn to the news really quick.
Yeah.
We wanted to catch you all up on the podcast, so we don't want to take too much time. But there are 2 articles I really want to highlight because I think they're important with all of the FOSTA, SESTA stuff that's going on in the news. I tweeted the other day, and I'm really feeling this. I feel like I live in 2 worlds. One world that's like totally dominated by the fallout of FOSTA, SESTA, and that's like all that anyone can think about and talk about. And people are like literally terrified about what's going to happen to them and how this is upending their lives. Mm-hmm. And other people, you know, in my life are like, FOSTA, SESTA, I think I heard about that. Isn't that like child trafficking thing? What's that all about?
Yeah, it's really weird.
It is, and I think that's the unfortunate part because it makes me feel like, man, if people knew more what was going on and how much of a crisis this is for a lot of people, you know, and sex workers in particular, maybe things would have played out differently, or maybe this would be getting more media attention. I mean, there's been a lot of great articles, but still, like, even when Trump signed the bill into law, like, you know, none of the news stations were covering it.
Right.
It just didn't get that much attention. It still hasn't like totally broken into the like broader public consciousness.
Right.
So if you're listening and this is still kind of new to you, I want to recommend an article that was in the DailyBeast recently that's titled, do you have the title?
Yeah, so the DailyBeast article is written by Amy Zimmerman, and it's titled Sex Workers Fear for Their Future, How SESTA is Putting Many Prostitutes in Peril.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great articles out there, but this one is some super reporting. She interviewed a lot of people, and I think really just...
Actually, one of the guests on this podcast.
Which was who? I forget.
Kate Diodamo.
Oh, right. Yeah.
She's featured in this article.
Right. This one really kind of steps back and just surveys all the different aspects of this issue and really gives you like a full picture of why it's problematic. And the other piece I want to mention really quick is an opinion piece that was published
in BuzzFeed.
In BuzzFeed, yeah. And that one is called The Sex Trafficking Panic is Based on Myths. And that was by...
That one was by Jenny Heineman and Brook Wagner.
I think this article is important because the justification for passing FOSTA and SESTA in the first place is to combat sex trafficking. While there's so much panic around sex trafficking right now and the existence of sex trafficking in the United States, we have really, really poor data. And we know really, really little about the actual extent of the problem. Even in the preamble to one of the bills, they cited quote unquote data on trafficking. But what that data turned out to be was just call volume to a hotline that was set up for sex trafficking. And they said there was a major uptick in calls, but that coincided with a major marketing campaign for the hotline. And what the numbers that we don't have are how many of those calls were actually verified as cases of trafficking, right? So an uptick in volume of calls doesn't at all necessarily equate to an uptick in trafficking. And that's a question that really needs to be studied, but it's not. And before we jump to passing a bunch of legislation on the idea that there is this major growing problem with sex trafficking, we probably ought to actually devote some resources to determining whether or not there really is a problem in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. You did a great job. I don't have anything else to add. I think we have a really exciting show that we should just move right on to.
Okay.
All right, we have Ruby Rockafella with us today. She began performing burlesque in 2002 after a private mentorship with DC's Miss Julie of the Tilted Torch, and she's been producing shows in Baltimore since 2014. Most recently, she was featured in the Baltimore Sun's Darkroom blog for her Blaze Star tribute photo shoot in collaboration with renowned photographer Steve Park. Ruby was a founding member of the Baltimore-based theatrical troupe Body Shop Burlesque. In 2016, she left the troupe to resume work as a solo performer and has since partnered with 13.5% Wine Bar to curate events. Known as a master of character and costume, her acts range from lovely to bizarre, always leaving the audience wondering what they just witnessed. Ruby, like any precious stone, loves to shine. She also loves to put shiny things on her crotch. And I just gave a bio, but can you tell us a little bit about your career up until this point?
Yeah, so I started performing burlesque about almost exactly 6 years ago. I started performing. I basically started because I had been in a really horrible relationship, and I kind of just wanted to reclaim myself.
Yeah.
And in addition to doing weird things like I went to live on an organic farm in Vermont for 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
I also started doing yoga, and I decided that burlesque was going to be part of my journey as well, to just become myself again, which is kind of funny because you kind of become another person when you do burlesque in addition to being yourself. So yeah, I worked with Miss Jewel, who was a performer in DC. She's since retired from burlesque, but I worked with her. She was from the troupe Tilted Torch, which performed at the Red Palace and Palace of Wonders before it was the Red Palace a lot. They always had sold out shows, and she was kind enough to take me on as her mentee. And I just got my start from there, and I really couldn't stop.
Wow. So tell me, I'm really curious about this. Did burlesque do what you wanted it to in terms of your own personal realization, or what was that process like for you?
Yeah, it absolutely did in a weird way, because like I said, you do kind of become this other persona, but I was pretty lost in that time in my life, and exploring kind of the exaggerations of what I thought I wanted to be, or what I envisioned myself to be, actually got me to where I wanted to be as a regular person as well, if that makes sense.
So you felt like
yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense.
playing those personas on stage sort of had a impact on the rest of your life then.
Yeah, it did. I gained a lot of confidence. I gained a lot of self-worth. I realized that I was talented in a lot of ways that I didn't know that I was, even with just, costuming or putting makeup on, or just, walking into a room.
Yeah.
It kind of affected a lot of aspects of my life.
And that's interesting too, because even what you just said, like all the costuming and makeup and all those other aspects, I think when a lot of people, at least viewers or audience members, think about burlesque and what burlesque is, sometimes maybe they don't think about all those different dimensions beyond just being on stage and playing the persona.
Yeah, it's a really DIY form of expression. Not everybody. Some people get costumes made for them, or some people hire a choreographer. But for me, I make my costumes, I create my acts, I choreograph, I pick out my music, and I style my own wigs. I do my own makeup.
Wow.
I do it all.
Did you learn all that along the way?
A lot of it was from this mentorship that I had with Miss Jewel. And then, the rest of it was just kind of learning as I go, surrounding myself with amazing performers, watching videos on YouTube, stuff like that. And there's a thing called the Burlesque Hall of Fame. It's basically like the Olympics of burlesque. Mm-hmm. And watching videos from performers from there was very inspiring to me.
Yeah, that's really neat. I actually recently, this is a personal aside, but I recently found this burlesque teacher and started working with her, but I've only done a couple of things. Yeah, but I don't have any of those skills. That's kind of why I was asking.
Yeah.
I'm I'm skillless. So is it possible to learn?
Of course it is. A lot of people in burlesque say that anyone can do burlesque. All you need is a body. I guess, and a brain.
And some guts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that actually points to like one of the interesting things about burlesque is it seems like it's a pretty body positive form of expression, that there is like a lot of diversity in the types of people who do burlesque.
Absolutely. I'm a producer of a show in Baltimore called Lush. And one of my goals for every show that I curate is to ensure that all types of bodies and basically all types of humans are represented.
Yeah.
So I don't always put out casting calls. I usually just reach out to people directly to be in the show. But when I do put out casting calls, I always say, all humans welcome. Because, we always have to say like, oh, all body types, all religions, all gender expressions, all sexualities, everything. So I just shorten it by saying, if you're human, please apply.
Yeah, I like it. Kind of just cut straight to the point.
Yeah. So to me, it's just important to show that anyone with a body, anyone in the physical form they're inhabiting is sexy and can share their beauty with people who may not have seen it before.
You performed while you were pregnant and modeled while you were pregnant. So speaking of like different body forms, what was that process like for you going through like a pregnancy and maintaining a performance?
Yeah. So I got pregnant in February of 2017, and I actually started showing pretty quickly because I have fibroids. There are tumors in my uterus. Like non-cancerous or anything. They're just an annoyance, really.
Yeah.
But they made me look way bigger than I should have during the pregnancy. Burlesque is a job to me. I didn't have a choice to stop, and I didn't want to stop. But I actually found out during this process that having a pregnant body is like a real commodity for the art modeling world. Like they're very excited to see a pregnant body and to draw a pregnant body because we're kind of rare. So they did, where I art model didn't know that I was pregnant at first, and I had to, begin letting them know. And they actually probably hired me a little bit more often than they would have.
Wow, that's great.
Found out. Yeah, because they kind of wanted to see the progression over the months.
Yeah.
When you said art modeling, were they doing like drawing or photography?
Oh, yeah, it was figure drawing.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a school in Annapolis that I work at. It's just a bunch of like old retired people who like to draw. So, like Wednesday morning at 9:30, they're like, let's draw.
That's awesome.
Must be nice to have that kind of time.
Yeah.
One day.
I can't wait till I retire.
We gotta get those kids out of the house.
Did that feel really like affirmative and empowering to you?
It actually did. So my art modeling story is kind of funny because the first time I ever art modeled nude was like a month after I got pregnant.
Oh,
wow.
So I had art modeled in costume many times before, but the first time I ever had to get up on a little stage and be completely nude and just stand there and let people scrutinize me. And measure me and draw me was when I was pregnant. So yeah, I kind of felt like this, I don't know, Rubenesque figure. And I really did enjoy it because pregnancy's weird. Weird shit happens to your body. You smell different.
Yeah.
You're growing in places you've never grown before. You're sweaty, you're tired. And, seeing people's representation of me, I kind of needed their eye to make me feel like I was beautiful sometimes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I do some alternative modeling and some camming and continued to do that while I was pregnant. And one of the things that I found really kind of shocking and interesting about that experience was that I assumed that people were going to kind of fetishize pregnancy in a way that I think some people do. And what I actually found was that a lot of fans I had were actually fairly nostalgic and romantic about it in a way that like wasn't fetishistic.
Yeah.
Like they were more like, oh, this is so sweet. I remember when my wife was pregnant, and almost looking back at that, like this was a really nice time in my life, and it was really sweet. Like there was a sweetness about having fans that are watching you through this pregnancy that was less, I think like less fetishistic than I assumed it was going to be.
Yeah, that's interesting because I didn't often think of it from the fetish perspective, but I thought burlesque was such a fringe art form and so radical that like being pregnant was such a normie thing that I thought I would be judged for choosing this like normie path essentially, but people were really into it and really supportive. And I found myself often surprised that people weren't like, ugh, how regular of you. They were like, oh my God, this is so exciting.
Yeah.
You're having a baby.
Have you ever read Maggie Nelson's The Argonauts?
I have not.
Oh, you might really love it. One of the things that she talks about, she's a queer woman she's not a burlesque performer, but she is a writer. She's a queer woman who's married to a trans man and they had a baby together. And she talked about, and he was actually going through transition like while she was pregnant. So that was kind of part of the story is like she was becoming, more female in the sense that she was pregnant while he was, on testosterone and they were going through this journey together. But the thing that was really interesting about it and reminded me of what you were saying is that she talked a lot about hitting up against that and feeling like being pregnant was this very like het norm thing to do.
Yeah.
And how to reconcile that with her identity.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty much as het norm as you get. So yeah, being pregnant, I actually had a lot of kind of mini breakdowns when I was pregnant where I would just like go up to my husband and I would just break down into tears and be like, I'm going to be so normal. No one's going to find me interesting anymore. And all I'm going to wear is yoga pants and t-shirts. And I'm not going to be fashionable or funny or creative anymore. And he was like, why? Why would that just happen? Like, won't be more creative and more interesting when you have a little tiny person to do those things with?
Yeah. I think that's really...
Yeah, the pregnant mind does weird things to you.
But you're putting your finger on something I think is true in culture. There's at least this stereotype that people have to give up some essence of themselves or their like creativity or whatever else when they have kids, that you can't both be an interesting or even sexual person or whatever. It's not not to say that those two things are the same thing, but it just seems like there's this stereotype that you have to give up a lot in order to have kids. And I mean, of course, you have to give up a lot of time and energy, but I don't know that you have to give up
who you are as
a person, which I do feel like some people kind of assume that, or there's some stereotype in our culture that assumes that is kind of a thing to wrestle with. I mean, particularly for women, but also for men, I think, to a lesser degree.
I have a baby, but I also have a 15-year-old. So I had a kid really young. And so I feel like I have a totally different orientation to a lot of that stuff because I don't actually remember a time that I wasn't a mom. I mean, I do.
Yeah.
I do, but I was never like an adult as a non-mom,
and you had younger sisters.
And I had younger sisters that I like helped too. So I've always kind of played like a mom role. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to me to hear you like as somebody who's actually an established adult before you have a child, talk about what that feels like or what the fears are about that.
Well, yeah, because I'm 35 years old. Like I had all of my 20s to be a total idiot and half of my 30s. And now I have to care for a human.
Right.
God, I know the feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting because I've had to think about like, well, who is it that I want to be? But I've always done that like in the context of being a mom already and, trying to do that. And I've heard a lot of people like you who are in their 30s when they have their first one, where they have to like negotiate those differences in ways that I maybe didn't have the opportunity to do or haven't had to think about, or, it's just a different path. Like you said, there's lots of different paths.
That's really interesting because, I now have to navigate what to do in my late 30s as a parent versus what I did in my 20s or my early 30s as a non-parent. And I haven't quite figured out, it's kind of hard to see your way past the newborn phase because it's completely draining and like life sucking. Like I know I'm going to do my show again.
Right.
I know I'm going to perform again, but it's like, I have no idea when, because like really all I can think about right now is when I'm going to feed the baby, when I'm going to feed myself, and when I'm going to sleep.
Yeah. Well, that's what it's like the first couple of months.
Yeah. So I'm kind of excited to get out of that phase. Like yesterday, we put the baby in the stroller and went to an art museum, and it was like the greatest thing, because I was like, oh my God, we're doing like a regular activity, and we can do it with a baby, and we're enjoying art and like weird stuff and creativity, and it's happening.
Yeah.
We can still do these things.
Yeah. No, ours is a year older, and we do all kinds of things. You get back
They're
to your
very
regular
mobile.
life.
Small. They're small, so you just pack them with.
But it is when you're completely sleep deprived and they're not sleeping through the night, and all you're doing is like, oh, I need to feed the baby and then I need to sleep sometimes. There's not much space for other thoughts.
Yeah, it's just challenging to think the way you used to think, because I guess you just can't anymore. I mean, I can't just think about like the show I'm going to produce. I have to think about the show I'm going to produce and who's going to watch my child.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And also like how you're going to function after the show. It's not as if you can sleep till whenever you feel like it.
Right.
You know, your whole like rhythm of life changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just that, but also I think like your social world and like even, you know, you make all these personal changes and, you know, in your schedule and how you do things, but you can't necessarily change all of your friends' expectations or all of, you know, their normal ways of doing things. And so you have to kind of like reinvent yourself in your world for like a new reality.
Yeah.
You know, and try to find like new ways of relating to people or whatever. And
Right. Yeah. And who's going to come along on that journey?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because not everyone does. And
Exactly.
I get that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because I mean, you're not necessarily going to be dragging the, you know, baby out at 11 at night to like,
Yeah.
you know, go drink at the bar or whatever. And
I mean, I'm tempted.
Yeah. You know, every once in a while when we have friends that text us and say like, do you want to meet us in half an hour? We're like, how can we do that? That would be like some magic.
Yeah.
I mean, we drag the baby along to plenty of things.
Yeah.
But there's all sorts of stuff like that. And even just like, you know, how much you drink and all of these other
Right.
things.
Right.
I mean, you know, especially when you're feeding a baby. It's
Yeah. I've just learned how much alcohol I can have before or while breastfeeding. It's still really scary to me. So I'm not drinking that much, but I'm like, I've had it with wine and I've had a beer. So it's nice.
Yeah. And sometimes you need that.
Yeah. Just a little bit, you know.
I remember with my first pregnancy, I was so, I guess because it was the first one, so strict about like I didn't drink any coffee at all, and I love coffee. And like 6 months into my pregnancy, I went to the OB-GYN and was like, hey, this pregnancy is pretty established. Can I have like a cup of coffee in the morning? We're past like a danger zone, right? And he was like, you could have had coffee the whole time. I was like, what? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. I had smaller cups of coffee.
Yeah. I was kind of upset. I was like, why didn't anybody tell me that?
And now our child crawls around and eats espresso beans off of the floor. So
Well,
Yeah.
you know, someone's got to clean them up.
Yeah.
is it coincidence?
Yeah. PJ's like, what's in his mouth? And I'm digging out of his mouth, and it's espresso beans, like whole espresso beans that fell down.
Wow.
We actually are good parents, despite the stories we've just told
Well,
you.
you know.
I mean, it's good that it was espresso beans and not like mouse turds or something.
Right, right. Yeah.
There's always a negative.
Yeah.
There's a scale.
Yeah.
One of the things that you said earlier that I thought was really interesting, though, that we kind of talked about at the beginning, was how you felt seeing other people's reactions to your changing body. And that sounded like that was a pretty positive experience for you. But like, I was also thinking a lot of feminist discourse about like stripping and porn and presumably burlesque, like these different forms
erotic
of
performances.
erotic performances, you know, that women enact, you know, is that they're objectifying or that men objectify them, and that's like a intrinsically negative thing. And I just thought it was like really interesting to hear you say, actually, no, it was helpful for me, or it was positive for me to see other people find my body attractive in those changing stages. And I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little more about that.
Yeah, that's kind of just one of my internal contradictions as being a feminist, I guess, is that like we're not supposed to be like, we're supposed to find ourselves attractive from within, which I do, you know, I can do that. But it's also really helpful sometimes for other people to look at you and be like, hey, you're looking pretty good.
Yeah.
And what's great about burlesque is that like while we are doing very erotic things on stage or sexual performance, a lot of what we do is geared toward the female gaze anyway. And it's not really with the goal of being objectified or, you know, that's going to happen, but fine.
Sure.
But when a woman watches another woman perform a burlesque act and at the end of the show says, wow, that was really inspiring, or I can't believe you did that. I don't feel like I could ever do that. And then you get to say, you could absolutely do that. Everyone can do that.
Yeah.
That's a really amazing feeling to do that. So I hate thinking like, oh, I'm doing this so someone else can tell me I'm beautiful. I'm definitely not doing that for that reason. But while I was pregnant, it was kind of just like an added bonus because especially with the art modeling, when I saw the artwork that was created from what I was putting on stage, I was like, oh my God, that's incredible. Like, I felt like a goddess, you know?
Yeah, that's so
you know,
nice.
And especially when you're pregnant, you just feel like a fat lump of just fleshy, sweaty, hormonal mess. When someone can create good art out of that, you're like, oh, wow, holy shit. I guess I'm doing all right.
Yeah.
So I have one more question.
Sure.
So, you know, we talk a lot about like pregnancy, but of course there's a lot of changes post-pregnancy and like the experience of having a baby and your relationship to the baby and all your body's hormonal changes like extend beyond, you know, actual childbirth, right?
Yeah.
Like into breastfeeding and probably beyond. And I'm just wondering if you've thought at all about like how now that you've had your baby and have had like a couple months to kind of settle in, like, do you think that this whole experience is going to change the way that you approach things going forward?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up postpartum stuff to begin with, because I feel like there's kind of like a lost period after you have a baby where you just kind of like disappear. And part of that is my choice because I need to care for a creature, but also
and yourself,
and myself, which is really hard. But I also feel like it's just that, you know, in a TV show, when a woman has a baby, as soon as the baby pops out, she's completely back to normal on the TV show. And you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, that's the worst expectation you could ever give a woman.
I always felt like that when I would see tabloids. It would say like, see how some celebrity is back at her regular body 6 weeks after the baby. And the thing that has always seemed totally offensive to me, like in the sense that, is that the most interesting thing about like this miraculous like process that's totally life altering? Then like what we should talk about it then is, are they wearing their jeans again or not? As if that's the most interesting thing that happened when...
Right. Yeah. And so like I had a C-section and I had an emergency C-section. So it was really traumatic. So like the body I have now is kind of just a reminder not only of the amazing person my husband and I created, but also of trauma.
Yeah.
So I think that is going to inform my performances going forward, because before I had like a pretty like solid, like typical beauty standard body. I have a little hourglass figure. I'm petite, but now I'm carrying scars. I'm carrying stretch marks, and I'm carrying milk.
Right.
And I'm carrying all these things that ultimately are because I have an amazing little daughter now.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see how that informs my performance. Oh, see, hormones. I'm getting a little weepy.
Oh.
But yeah, it's hard to say what's in store for the next couple months. I would like to bring my show back at 13.5% Wine Bar probably around March.
Yeah.
And then going forward, I really do want to keep performing because I really do believe that burlesque is a feminist art form.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want my daughter to know that it's something that I do.
Yeah.
And I don't want to stop because I have her, because some people think it might be inappropriate.
Right.
I want her to know that how she chooses to express herself is up to her and a choice that she gets to make versus other people making it for her.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of my future, I guess. That's big, huh?
No, I think it's beautiful, actually.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, as like a parent, I think about the same thing all the time. Like, there's so many opinions, particularly around like sexuality and women's sexuality, about not, I don't know, about like limiting that for the sake of the kids. And,
Right.
And as if, your own sexual expression is something that's shameful. And, to hear another woman and to hear a mother say, actually, I don't want to do that because I want to show my kids that women should make their own decisions about their bodies and about their self-expression, I think is really important. And
Absolutely.
I'm glad there are people in the world like you who feel that way.
Thank you.
Where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about your work and your performance?
Okay, so I'm Ruby Rockafella. That's Fella at the end, not ER.
Yeah.
So I have www.rubyrockafella.com is my website. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. My Instagram is just Ruby Rockafella, and same as Facebook. It's pretty public, so you should be able to find me. And eventually I'll get back to having my show Lush, Burlesque, and Variety at 13.5% Wine Bar. That's in Hamden in Baltimore. And otherwise, I'm usually walking around somewhere in the city, hanging up flyers or having coffee. Or
that sounds great.
Now I'll be like breastfeeding in public.
Yeah. You go.
Yeah.
I did that too, and I did not give a shit what anyone thought.
It should not. It's completely legal, and it should be.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for talking to us.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
Okay, so we have Alex Bishop with us. Alex Bishop is a survival sex worker, amateur content creator, and single mother of 2. Welcome.
Hi.
I'm happy to have you here. And we also have Penny Trait. So Penny Trait's an online sex worker, independent porn producer, and proud mother. So I had you guys on today because I wanted to talk about being an out mom and an out sex worker and how you guys deal with the relationship between those things. So Penny, you tell me a little bit about how your career's been and what you do.
So basically, I mostly, at this point in my career, create content and do live camming and live phone sessions. My child goes to public school, so I'm basically on that schedule. I will work during the daytime hours and just do kind of the family thing in the evenings.
Yeah. Have you found that this sort of work is really conducive to that?
Oh, it works great.
Yeah.
With that, yeah. I think it's the perfect schedule. In fact, it's something that I would recommend to any mom, really, because you work while your children are away and you're right in your home. You don't actually have to leave your home.
Yeah, that's nice. Alex, tell me a little bit about your work.
I'm also a amateur clip maker. I do all sorts of things, clips, phones, cam work, texting, all kinds of stuff. And I've been doing it almost 4 years now. I would say that it definitely, I agree with what Penny says, that it's something that has worked so well with being able to raise my kids the way that I want to. And, while they're in school, you can work. And when they're out of school, you're done. You can just base your entire schedule around your kid's life, basically. And it's great because when I worked other jobs, it was definitely not like that. And when you're a single mom, there's nobody there to watch your kids. So
Right.
you're going to pay for that. That's more money coming out of your pocket, things you can't afford anyways. It's
Right.
like,
Yeah, and it's so expensive. So
Definitely.
expensive to have your kids in care.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's almost like you have to work another job just to put them in childcare.
Yeah, and I think that once you have like more than one too, I remember thinking that you have to make so much money to justify putting them in care, and most jobs don't even give you enough money to do that.
Absolutely. That's kind of how I've based finding a job. I mean, I look right at how much am I going to make? What are the times I'm going to be away? And if that doesn't work, and it usually doesn't work. So
Yeah.
it's done.
Yeah.
And I think that, oh, sorry, Jesse.
No, go ahead, Penny.
I think that really, unfortunately, represents the modern woman's struggle today. A woman, she wants to work. She, a lot of times, is expected to work. A lot of the households need, even dual households, need both adult income just to support a household. And let alone a single mother who's, struggling to do this. And I think that's the problem I think a lot of women run into is they're working strictly to pay for their daycare. And they come to this conundrum where it's like, why am I even going to work? Why am I paying someone else to raise my child so that I could go to work when I should be home taking care of my child, or I want to be home, but I also want to work. So I think it's difficult for women today.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think that's why doing work the way that we do is also really helpful, because you do get to, run your own business and have a bunch of your own like clients and things. So it kind of feeds that desire to have something of your own, but also be able to be flexible and be home with your kids. Because that's one of the things that I thought about while you were talking, is that I think even in like dual income households, often all of the housework, I mean, studies show this too, like still falls on the woman, even if she's working like a full-time job. So the problem that a lot of working women have is that they're out and they're working like a full-time job, and then they're coming home and they're doing their like household stuff and their kids stuff like as another whole full-time job.
Definitely.
Exactly.
Yeah, so what do you think are some of the hard things about it?
I would definitely say the stigma attached to being a sex worker and being a sex working mom. I don't think people really want to equate those two things, because being a mom isn't typically a sexy thing, or people don't want to see that as being sexy usually. And so they don't like to look at those things together. And I think that causes people to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There's that right off the bat. And then, obviously having people, wonder if you're able to make the right decisions for your children because of what you're doing with your life. Things like that. People don't really trust you or your decisions. They don't understand.
Yeah, I think that the point that you made is really good, that there is like sex work stigma, but on top of sex work stigma, people are more uncomfortable with mothers doing that.
It's very unfortunate. It's a complete hypocrisy in this country, because at the same time, and I think me and Alex both can relate to, well, all of us, we are all MILFs. That's exactly how I sell myself, is as that, as a sexual mom. And so it's just this complete backwards society we live in that is constantly degrading us for what we do, yet at the same time, it's always in demand, and it's something that it's always there.
Definitely. I mean, MILF is one of the top searched terms in pornography. And that's another reason I also, market myself with that word a lot of times. And it's like, okay, you want us to be MILFs, but not actually have the kids, like this.
Once again, it comes back to the fantasy, everyone's okay with the fantasy, but nobody wants to accept the reality that we are actual human beings. We are actual mothers with families and lives, and it is what it is.
Yeah, and it actually seems totally ironic to me, because the only reason that we became moms is from being sexual beings. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But there's something that happens, I think, in our culture when as soon as you move into like a motherhood status, you become desexualized.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so there's something kind of radical about like reclaiming sexuality, like as a mother, I think.
I think so too.
Tell me a little bit about how you handle this with your kids and whether you talk to your kids about it or not.
My kids watched me drop them off at Safe Key and, wake up at 5 a.m., drop them off, race to a job that I didn't make enough at, race to another job I didn't make enough at, try to race to get them out of school in time so that I didn't have to pay that fee that I couldn't afford to keep them in Safe Key, after school, barely put food on the table. They watched me struggle after I left their dad, and they saw how our life went from being pretty easy with mom staying at home taking care of us to mom being thrown right into, a lot of things all at once. And our life changed dramatically. So their dad is an addict, and that's why I left him. And I already had to speak to them about some pretty serious issues surrounding addiction and whatnot. And at a young age, I wanted to be open with my kids because I grew up in a home where things were kept very secret. My dad was an addict as well. And I kind of grew up feeling like it was my fault. I didn't understand any of these things. I didn't understand addiction. I grew up marrying an addict. So I wanted my kids to be aware of the realities of life. I feel like these are things that can happen to anyone. So when I made the decision to get into sex work, at first I kept it a secret because I was new to everything and I was ashamed, to be honest. I was scared, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know if it was the right decision. But once I quickly realized that it was, and how much better our life got so drastically, just within a matter of 6 months, I decided, that it was something that I needed to talk to them about. I was working while they were in school, so they never had any idea, and I always hid things and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. And they wondered, how I quit my job at first. And I told them I was actually teaching yoga online. That's what I told everyone for like about a year. I told everyone I was teaching yoga online.
Is that a job? Can people do that?
That'd be a great gig.
Yeah, I actually have. I get a lot of fine stuff now. Yeah, so
she doesn't know that was just new.
Yeah, but and they totally bought it. And Steph and I just explained them as a way like, hey, you guys know how you watch YouTube? Well, mom makes videos like that too, doing yoga, and I get views and I get paid and blah blah blah. And they accepted that. And then over time, I was actually outed in front of them by a family member who was angry. And
wow.
And it really upset me because it's not that I didn't want them to know, but I wanted them to know on my terms.
Yeah.
And so I had a discussion with them, and I just explained to them the best I could kind of what stripping is. I thought that would be a good place to start. And I basically explained to them that it's a form of entertainment that adults partake in, and that nudity is acceptable and our bodies are beautiful and things like that. And that's kind of what I like to share with them. And I, explain to them financial things like, remember when mom had made this much money and this is how much rent was and this is how much groceries are, and we broke it all down. And then I explained to them, well, look how much I make now, and this, we can afford this and this and this, and we can do this. And that's how I explained it to them. And they totally accepted and understood it. And I know they saw me go from here to there, and they're not going to judge me for it. So take it day by day. And been doing it like almost 4 years now, and there hasn't been an issue. So
yeah. Do you think that they talk to other people about that, or how do they handle that with their peers?
That's something that I've also explained, the stigma, I've explained how our relatives might view me for doing these things because we have relatives that don't view me in a favorable light. And I have to explain to them why, And so I've talked to them about, maybe we don't, when someone asks what I do, we say that I teach yoga online, because that's something that I'm not comfortable with having them lie, but I also am not comfortable with bringing on more negativity than we need in our life if they do talk to other kids or their parents or whatever.
Right.
So unfortunately, that's a sad, thing that we have to deal with in this line of work, is making those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, I had similar experiences with my kids. I could have actually probably gotten away with not talking to them for a while about the online sex work that I do, except that I started to do this podcast and running a swap chapter and doing like more public facing thing that wasn't actually sex work, but that was discussions and activism around sex work to the point that I was getting some sort of like recognition in our community. And I was, wait, some kid's parent is going to see me in the newspaper talking about sex worker rights or doing some of the writing or even our podcast that we've done. And so I had to sit down with them and say, listen, I do this sort of work and people are finding out that I do this sort of work and it is heavily stigmatized. That's the thing that I talk to them about too. Like, there are people who are not going to like that. And they were like really amazing. And my biggest, they were like, oh, okay, well, that's... I understand that. Like, it's a job. My 12-year-old was really funny. When I tried to explain it to him, I tried to explain about talking to people because I do a lot of phone sex. Well, I talk to people about their desires and their interests. And he was like, so you're like an online therapist, but you talk about sex? And I'm like, yeah, okay.
Pretty much, right?
I was like, that's actually pretty good. You understand this better than like most adults.
Yeah,
but
totally. I think kids really do. They haven't been tainted yet in those ways.
Yeah, they haven't. And that's interesting. So the kids were like very receptive and like, okay, well, you do what you need to do. Like, I understand that and I'll be supportive. But the hardest part for me about that, and it's interesting to hear you say this too, is to talk to them about, well, other people aren't as open about this. So you have to be aware that people may say bad things about it. And that certainly happened in our families too. You know, not everybody being super happy. And, you know, and that stuff is really hard.
It's hard for children to watch the adults in their life battle and go to war, especially over subjects like this that they sometimes don't fully understand anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely.
And
yeah, I know, Penny, that you haven't talked to your kid about it. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about how you're dealing with that and how you think about it.
Well, honestly, I haven't ever really dealt with it that great. It's always been something that's nagging at me. It's, I mean, I basically live a double life. And I feel like I'm constantly, you know, almost lying to my child, which... as a parent, well, obviously everyone has to lie to their kids a little bit here and there, you know, to protect them. But you want to teach, you know, your children to be honest people. And especially in my life, and I think everyone's life, obviously, it's just honesty is so important. And so to be this way and to kind of keep such a big secret it's very hard to do. But I think children today are a lot more accepting than they've ever been with just the way things are today. I think, well, my child especially, she's 12, but she's very liberal and she's very open-minded. And she knows a lot about a lot of things happening in our country today. And I think she would be accepting of this. I'm just, there's a great fear inside of me because we don't want to hurt our children. And I don't want the things that I do to end up hurting her in some way. And so it's a tricky thing, but I definitely feel that with the way things are politically today, I know I'm just kind of on the verge of coming out to her. It's kind of more a matter of when at this point or how soon. So it's just it's a difficult thing. People have a hard time talking about sexuality in general, which it really shouldn't be that way. And in our household, it never really has been that way. And so that's kind of the irony of this big secret that I keep is I'm not ashamed of what I do. So why am I hiding it? My child, my daughter. And there's so many complexities involved. I could go on for hours, but it's not easy. And I think a lot of people struggle with this with a lot of the people in their life, whether it be their parents or their siblings. It's hard not to be honest about who we are. And I think I want to be able to teach my child to be who she is, be honest about who she is, stand up for what she believes in. And yet I'm kind of in a corner hiding, I feel. And it's not easy.
It's so complicated though, because I think that even after, I mean, I feel this fear so hard because even after you talk to them, my middle schooler the other day was saying, I don't know what's going on, but I'm feeling really sad. Well, that's super normal for a middle schooler because middle school is kind of terrible. And puberty is really hard.
Yeah.
But even though I know that, there was a part of me that was like, is he upset because he knows what I do, but he doesn't want to say that?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, that's so interesting that even though I'm not ashamed of what I do, and he hasn't expressed any like concern about it whatsoever, my first thought when he's upset is like, is he upset about this thing? And I don't think I actually don't think that he is,
you know?
but I think that we like internalize that, like the judgment of everybody else and a fear that he's somehow picked up on that, or I don't know. That's why I think that these things are complicated, however way you do it. If you do come out to them, or if you don't come out to them, it's still complicated.
Definitely. I think that's why, you know, something needs to happen as far as the way sex workers are perceived. And, you know, with everything happening right now with Stormy Daniels and FOSTA SESTA, I kind of hope that this is starting to open people's eyes to, you know, how many women are actually impacted by all this and how relevant it is, especially in these times with a lot of people living below wage and single moms and things like that. It's going to be a reality. You know, we're here, whether they like it or not. And it's not fair, you know, knowing so many good people in this community, knowing so many great mothers who would do anything for their kids, just like any other mom.
Right.
You know, knowing how hard we work, we're just like anyone else. We're just workers. We just do something that not many other people do. And it's extremely upsetting to me that we even have to deal with these complexities and these stigmas and not telling our kids and not telling this person or that person or worrying about having someone come after us or it's not fair. It's just not right, you know?
Or worrying about somebody using this information like against you, you know.
Totally.
Well, especially considering porn is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's what people are spending their money on.
Right.
However, they're turning around throwing rocks at us.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. And it's frustrating to live in 2018 and still see that this is where we're at in America. It's not right.
We need to be like humanized in a way that people care about what's happening to the fate of all of us.
Yes, I was going to say that too. I think that, you know, the sex workers that do have the safety and ability to come out as much as they can should, especially right now, because people need to equate stories and faces and things of that nature to what we do for a living. They need to see a sense of humanity behind what we're doing. It's so important. And that's kind of what has stirred me recently. I mean, even when you spoke to me about doing this, I've been nervous the last week, wondering, is this even a good decision? I've been wanting to get so vocal in this community for so long, but I've been shut down over and over and over. I've had some of the worst luck, especially last year, and I've just been fighting, and I'm just like, is it worth it? And now I see so many others going through that and remembering what I went through literally, you know, a few years back when I was almost on the streets. And it's affecting me too much inside. It's making me feel like you're privileged. You need to speak up. There's people down, you know, that don't have a voice. Use your voice. People listen to you, you know?
Yeah.
So
a friend of mine and I started a swap chapter in Pittsburgh and where we live. And we recently went to the city paper to talk to the press about what was going on with FOSTA and SESTA. And I had the same sort of feeling where I was like, they wanted us to send like pictures and stuff. And this is going in like our city paper. And I was thinking, which is, you know, one of the reasons I've talked to the kids, because I keep doing these things. But there was a moment where I was like, do I really want to send my picture to the paper in relationship to being like a sex worker? And I thought, well, yes, I do, because I am enormously privileged, because I'm not a full service worker, so I can't get legally in trouble right now for the things that I'm doing. And I felt like you. I really should use that. And, you know, in order to normalize and try to, there's always going to be stigma, but we can try to destigmatize, we can try to normalize, we can try to put forward a representation of regular people who have made the choice to do sex work and represent understand why that is a legitimate choice for us and why we still deserve rights, which sounds so stupid, like to have to assert that we deserve rights that everybody else does. But I think it's important.
Oh, sorry. No. Yeah. And people don't realize that sex work can benefit your life. That's why I love Alex's story, for example. You know, she was in a really, really scary, desperate situation in her life, and she was able to come through that with the help of sex work. And I feel a lot of women are in that situation, and I feel so many more women could benefit if they had that knowledge. Especially, you know, some of these women who are full service, you know, on the streets still, you know, in dangerous conditions. And if they maybe had, you know, the resources to do online work, it could maybe, you know, help improve their lives. That's one of the things when I first became a cam girl, I wanted to tell all of my girlfriends. I wanted all of them to know what I was doing and how much money I was making, and that I was at home. And I mean, there's just so many advantages. And it's like, I feel like every woman should webcam or do any kind of online work from home, because it's the freedom, and you can do so much. There are just so many different avenues you could take. And you know, I did end up telling a couple sisters and a couple friends who I trusted, and, you know, in hopes to help them, because they needed money. They needed help. And that's kind of what I think what people don't understand is that this can really benefit someone's life. This isn't the desperate, sad lifestyle a lot of people picture in their minds. Right. All of us, I was going to say, you know, me and Alex, all three of us are a prime example. The whole community, really. Yeah. I mean, we're just normal people trying to live our lives, trying to raise our families the best we can.
Yeah. I also think that I think that people outside of the sex industry also paint it as like very seedy or very, and one of the things that I want to say is not only does it benefit us, I think it's really important work. Yes. I think that it's really life-changing for so many people. I feel like the clients that I have, it's very intimate. It's very important. I think that the work that we do changes their lives in ways that are like really powerful and really meaningful. I mean, not in every situation, but that's the case in every job. Like teachers' jobs are also really important, and they also really benefit people. Not every single person that they teach, but like, I think that we have the same sort of impact on people's lives, and that we allow them to explore themselves. We allow them to explore their sexualities in a way that's like very safe for them. I think that the work that we do is really important, and I think it ought to be recognized as important work.
In here.
I think so too. Human sexuality, it's who we are. It's not something that we should be ashamed of and afraid to communicate to our children, or it's hard to live in a country where there's such a stigma around sex. It's frustrating, so frustrating. And I agree. I think whether our jobs, whether you're just like seriously getting off for the day, because we all masturbate. I mean, okay, maybe you don't. I doubt anyone who listens to this podcast doesn't masturbate, but you know, it's just human sexuality is not going anywhere. We need to stop crucifying the sex workers who are providing this valuable service that's been around for thousands of years and isn't going anywhere.
I actually read something like that a few months ago that said that, you know, sex workers essentially are told how much they're loved every day and hated. So it's like we're being gaslit every day of our lives. And we live in this constant, insane pattern. I don't know. I like what you both have said about, you know, how this is important work and it should be respected. And I know personally, I've touched, you know, so many people, and I feel like companionship and intimacy is taken for granted in our society, but there's so many people that don't just easily get that or come by it, you know, and they need that in their lives. It's been proven that it's, you know, a part of staying healthy, and it's not right to take that away or for people to see this as like some seedy thing. Like you said, it can be a beautiful thing if you decide to look at it that way. You just have to look a little deeper.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's the way that we ought to be talking about sex work. And that's the way that we ought to be thinking about sex work, as like providing something that's really valuable to people. I feel like there's a way in which the discourse about sex work is being controlled by people out who aren't sex workers, who don't actually know what's going on or don't understand what our relationships with our clients are like, or what sort of impact our work has.
Exactly.
I know that all three of us have made the decision with our Twitter presences and with our other presences to be fairly open about the fact that we have kids, and to even at times like market being a MILF, but MILFs that actually have kids, not just women in their 30s. Was that a difficult decision for you to make, Alex? Or how did you think about that?
You know, I was just so used to being a mom and having it encompass me almost entirely that it didn't make any sense to not bring it up. Yeah. And I never really completely gave it a lot of thought, to be honest. And this was before I was even kind of, had a lot of followers or whatever and things like that. You know, I talked to my regulars or customers that would come in about, funny things that had happened or this and that. Nothing in great detail, but they knew I was a mom.
Yeah.
And it was just never anything I thought about. And over time, as I have gotten more of a presence, I've gone back and forth on that decision. Sometimes I wish maybe I had just left that out. But, with things coming full circle now, I am happy that I was honest about it. And, I think as long as you do it the right way, obviously you're not going to be giving out names and pictures and things like that. Right. I think that it can be a positive thing, because then again, you're kind of out there for other people that need that, other moms.
Right.
While it's scary sometimes having people know something so intimate about me, and maybe being able to use that to hurt me in any way, I haven't gotten anything, I haven't had anything bad happen because of it. So for now, with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's interesting what you're saying. I thought about it the same way, which is not that much, because I can't imagine not being a mom. It's so like integrated into my own sense of identity. I mean, I had my first one when I was 24. So it's hard for me to even imagine living a life and not being a mother, and that being, for me, like that's been my entire life. And so it would be really hard for me. I'd have to create a persona that's so abstract and different from life.
Well, no, I think it's also a way to connect with our clients. I've had conversations with clients who are also parents about, their children, and just, again, nothing personal. Obviously, I'm never going to give you my kid's name and, things like that. But parents like to be able to talk to each other and relate to each other. And so to have my clients also see me in that light, again, I think it helps to humanize us and show, again, I'm not just this sex symbol. I'm also a human being. I wear lots of hats, as we all do.
Yeah. So I think that what you said, Alex, was actually really important too, which is that it's not just necessarily about your marketing for customers, but it's also about being an example for other mothers who might be struggling with how to, or who may just want to see that there's other people like them.
Yeah.
Because I think that there is something about seeing, for me even, like seeing you two as part of the community and the other moms who are part of the community, to not feel like isolated in that, or that you're doing something that's weird, but that other people do it as well. I think that that's actually really powerful.
It is. It's true. When I find out someone else is a mom, I'm just like, so excited about that revelation. And and I also think it kind of changes, maybe the type of crowd you attract as well. Because a lot of the guys that are my fans that have been around for a long time really like the fact that they're helping out someone that's like raising kids on their own. That kind of like inspires them, maybe they're single dads or whatever, it's kind of to have that kind of support. So.
Yeah. And I think if you're not willing to like share something
of yourself, then there's not something for people to connect with.
Definitely.
Yeah, so that's a great place. So, Penny, you've been talking a little bit about wanting to set up resources for mothers who are sex workers. So let's talk a little bit about what you're thinking.
Yeah, I've always, like I mentioned, as soon as I started online sex work, and even when I was a stripper, I felt like I wanted to kind of share that with my other single mother friends and let them know, look, you don't have to do 9 to 5 for minimum wage, and you have options. And I've always had that desire to just kind of, set something up to help women in need. I surely know it would have benefited me when I was looking. I, of course, stumbled upon sex work in my own way many years ago, long before I became a mother. So actually, after I had my child, I was relieved to be able to go back to dancing and make really good money, and also be able to become a full-time student and pretty much support my life with stripping. And it was no different when I became an online performer. I got really excited about sharing the news with other moms who were in dire needs. So that's kind of where I want to go with this, is just open an organization that will assist mothers in need. I want to educate women about online sex work. And I mean, really, we're business women. This is not a joke. This is a full-time business.
It really is.
And you can do it. I mean, I never thought that I would be where I am creating content and just all of that. Years ago, when I first learned about camming, I never even would have known how to do that or how to get started. And, thanks to just the experience and meeting other women in the industry, I've kind of learned how to do those things. And I want to kind of take my knowledge and pass it on to the next woman who might need it.
Yeah.
And who might, who maybe doesn't know that you could do this. And obviously this type of work is not for everyone.
Sure.
But it happens to be for a lot of people. And there are so many different facets to this job, whether it be foot fetish or MILFs or, whatever your fetish may be, burping, farting. I mean, all of it. It's in demand.
Yeah.
And if
anything you could possibly think of.
The people that I have met in this community are smart, creative, artistic, driven, amazing women who are just not only just
and
surviving,
warm and kind,
about
and
what they do.
Yeah.
It's exciting. I think it's one of the most amazing communities I've ever been a part of.
Definitely.
And so I'd love to open that up to a lot of women who really don't know where to go. They need help. I know people do.
Yeah, I think about me being, without internet and a computer and just on my phone trying to figure out how to make money, and finding myself an escort as well, trying to figure that out. How do I do this? How do I screen people? All these things that can keep someone alive and help them thrive. And there just needs to be more of a community, I think, as far as that kind of stuff goes, and outreach or something, because there just isn't enough going on. There's too many people slipping through the cracks.
We're just kind of getting started. So be ready for more information.
Yeah, so as a precursor to a lot of the work that we want to get out, we set up a Twitter handle for people who are interested in this sort of information to connect with one another, and that's at Sex Worker Mamas, MAMAS. Well, that's relatively new, and while we haven't had a chance to do a lot there, what we are trying to do is put out as much information as possible in different sources, particularly, and we had this set up like before FOSTA, SESTA, but particularly now we need to have information out in as many different places as possible, because the places that they were, a lot of those are getting shut down. So yeah, we're trying to set that up. So if people who are interested could go, that would be great. It would also be nice for people who have resources to, send those along as well. People who are in need of resources, it would be great if they followed that Twitter handle or any of our Twitter handles, but also people who have information, it would be great for them to pass that along our our way. Where can people find you guys who want to go look for your work?
Well, you can find, like me, just me, like at my
you.
Twitter handle.
Where can people
I'm at
find
Penny
you?
Trait,
Mm-hmm.
which is simple. It's just my name. But yeah, that's where you can find me if you want, the sexy stuff. Or, like I said, if you, want to follow our Sex Worker Mama's account to get more involved in what we want to do to aid the community, that's where you'll find us there.
All right, awesome. And Alex?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at I Love Alex Bishop or ilovealexbishop.com if you want to support my work.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us. A special thank you to our wonderful guests who shared so much of themselves with us today. You can find Ruby Rockafella on her website, rubyrockafella.com. You can find Penny Trait on Twitter at Penny Trait, and Alex Bishop on Twitter at I Love Alex Bishop, or on her website, ilovealexbishop.com.
I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual.
And I'm PJ Sage, and you can find me at Peach Sage.
We would like to remind you that we do have a Patreon account and would appreciate your support. Please visit patreon.com/peepshowpodcast. A special thanks to our brand new Patreon, Kevin Wandering. Thanks to Joe Kennedy for the music. The show was produced by Jessie and PJ Sage. Signing off. Have a great week.